So, the big annual climate conference, COP28, just concluded in Dubai. It was held this month. I'm curious, how did China shape the outcome?
So China was and is always a big player in the climate space simply by virtue of being by far the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, has been for about 20 years since passing the United States. It's not the largest emitter historically. When you add up all the emissions since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the US is still pretty far ahead,
Number one.
but China's catching up fast. So what China does really matters. We can't solve the climate problem without China being a very active player. So it's always the elephant in the room. And on the one hand, it plays a very constructive role. On the other, it tends to not be as in the forefront as you might think. It tends to, I think, work more on the margins and in the background. I think the prevailing view amongst Chinese diplomats, probably not incorrectly, is that by being the center of attention, you tend to get caught in the crosshairs. In other words, it's the opposite of all press is good press. On the contrary, no press is good press. If the world is not focused as much on China's role in contributing to net zero, to reducing emissions, then it's a good day for China's international reputation. So they do some things that are quite helpful and quite productive, and they are a constructive player.
In what sense are they like? What are some of the things that are constructive that they're helping?
In terms of constructive, well, this year, for the first time, they committed in a bilateral agreement right before the COP with the US to bring down their methane emissions. Methane being the second most important greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide, and actually has an outsized impact on global warming over a shorter time frame. Carbon dioxide sticks around for centuries. Methane sticks around for about a decade. So you add up the impact and it's smaller than CO2, but if you can reduce methane emissions, the climate feels it a lot faster. So you can actually achieve more benefits in terms of bending the curve of greenhouse gas emissions and global warming if you can tackle these pollutants like methane. So it's really important. It's become a major global focus. It was one of the key plot lines of COP28, and China join the action substantively for the first time. So that was really helpful.
So China's not reducing methane; they're pledging to reduce methane.
That's right, but that's also true for most of the rest of the world. And part of the challenge of the climate diplomatic world is there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So even the ostensibly environmentally friendly countries are in many cases struggling mightily to reduce their emissions. So while that's true of China, they're not any more guilty of that than anyone else.
And so, what's China's biggest source of methane emissions? I assume it's cow farts.
Don't forget the burps too. The methane farts and burps. The anaerobic methane from that is an important source. China has many different sources. I would venture to guess that the largest source is actually coal mine methane because or coal bed methane, because that is one of the largest sources globally, but it's concentrated in those areas that have a lot of coal. It's probably not news to you that China has a ton of coal. So it methane, which is basically natural gas, often coexists in the same underground deposits as coal. So if you start digging up the coal, unless you're doing something special to capture and remove it, the methane that is, you're going to wind up with a lot of vented methane to the atmosphere when you open up these underground seams. And so that is likely a big one. But there are other sources as well.
So from that perspective, like in order for China to reduce methane tied to coal production, they basically have to greatly reduce coal production, which may or may not happen.
There are some technical nuances there. Now, I'd be the first one to tell you that reducing coal consumption is a critical and urgent solution to the climate crisis. And China is by far the world's largest coal producer and consumer. At the same time, it's not a perfect one-to-one relationship, how much coal you're consuming and how much coal mine methane you're producing, because you actually can capture the methane in most circumstances using specialized airflow and fans and vacuums and stuff like that. And you can collect it and either burn it off, which is known as flaring, or use it as a fuel, because methane is basically natural gas. It's the primary constituent of natural gas, and it's highly flammable. In fact, often you have to remove the methane from coal mines because it is a flammability hazard. Whenever you're hearing about mine accidents that are explosions, it is almost always because the methane was not properly managed and removed, and there was some spark that caused the methane infused air in the coal mine to ignite. So it's actually a major safety issue, even besides this environmental issue. But you do need specialized equipment and regulations and attention and all these things and building infrastructure to do it properly. You also can get coal mine vented from old mine shafts or coal beds that have never been mined, where it's just seeping out if there's some way that it can get to the surface. So in that sense, the coal production and the coal mine methane are not perfectly correlated, though obviously if they were leaving all their coal alone in the ground, you wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem.
Is that an expensive process? Because I know the Chinese economy is not doing well right now. So I kind of question whether the Chinese Communist Party would even bother to implement this agreement.
It's a good question. Methane is a tricky issue in general, and being the climate dork that I am, I could talk about methane all day long, with regards to China and otherwise. But a quick note about methane is that a lot of it comes not only from coal but from the oil and gas industry. Now, China is not as big an oil and gas producer as many other countries, but it does have oil and gas, so that's another source of methane. The funny thing about the oil and gas industry is that despite the fact that they are literally letting their product go up in smoke if they are letting it leak, right? The natural gas that they're leaking is not just a pollutant, it is the product that they're selling most of the time. Or it's a byproduct of the oil, but it's still something in theory that they could capture for a variety of reasons, from negligence to um, difficulty with managing infrastructure to uh, insufficient capital to create the machinery that captures the methane. A lot of it is wasted or vented and leaked, even though if it were captured, they would be able to sell it and make money from it. So that's kind of the weird thing about this, that even though it is, it's the proverbial $20 bill lying on the ground, the economist says, well, it's not possible that it's real because someone would have picked it up. It actually is true that they are often losing money by not capturing these things, but you don't see methane, you don't smell methane. If you're already making money anyway, maybe you're not paying that much attention to it, maybe it's too much trouble. And so that often comes into play. Those factors can even be more important than the net cost, because you might make more money from capturing it than you would be spending to to set up those systems, but it doesn't happen. And that's just often requires regulation to get done. And that was incidentally a big topic at COP28.